Thank you, Senator. And to follow up on that, is there a penalty for not, is there any penalty in the law or the rule that basically if you don't basically allow the leases to happen in a timely fashion, any retribution to the department? Not aware of. Maybe that's our problem. Okay, Secretary Haaland, I alluded in my statement, your request of a budget increase of $935 million or 5% increase over last year's. I also see your proposed budget expects Interior will collect nearly $700 million less in bonuses, rents, and royalties because you all have chosen to have less lease sales and discourage production on public lands and waters. It's really kind of hard to justify to the taxpayers why we should be using tax dollars to increase the budget for the Department of Interior $935 million when you have the ability to collect this and be self-sustaining, but you've reduced it by $700 million. So I'd like to hear y'all's concerns about that, or that's a $1.6 billion swing.
Thank you, Chairman. The fiscal year 2024 estimate was recently updated and increased $3.3 billion from last year's projection. Both the fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2024 estimates reflect an overall upward revenue trend, and differences between 2025 and 2024 reflect lower OMB price assumptions for oil and gas and lower offshore bonus amounts for 2025.
So you agree that there's going to be less coming in, the $700 million you agree with is less revenue coming in because of a reduction of I think you're saying reduction of the prices and the royalties you would get, or just the leases that we have and the money we receive from the leases?
Chairman, the estimates reflect a point in time and can change quickly based on assumptions and events. For instance, the price of oil affects the royalties companies pay, and that can actually fluctuate.
You'd all have to agree that having less lease sales is going to affect that greatly. I mean, we'd have to acknowledge that because that's just it's just common sense. The other question I have, in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Congress gave you a statutory deadline to issue a final offshore carbon capture and storage regulations by November 22, okay? November 22, we're 2 years down the road. You missed that deadline and continue to delay each year. All the science tells us we cannot meet our climate goals without carbon capture sequestration. And given the administration's focus on decarbonization, this initiative should be a top priority, which we made it a top priority in about every piece of legislation that we had done, yet a draft rule has not even been published yet. So when do you think you will publish a proposed rule for comment, since we're 2 years behind already?
Chairman, thank you for the question. And as you can imagine, creating a new regulatory program for a new applied technology is creating, it's very technical and it's very complex. We want to make sure we're doing a good job. We're consulting with the industry, with other government agencies and countries to ensure efficient and comprehensive process. We don't have an actual estimated time for this to be completed, but I want to assure you that we are working on it.
How much CO2 has a 3-year delay that's been left unsequestered? I mean, do you have any idea how much is out there that we're not sequestering?
I couldn't answer that at the moment, but of course we would be happy to give you a status update on where we are with this, and know that our scientists.
Let me make it very clear that the people that are producing records amount today and makes us more energy secure than ever before. You know, that we produce 38 trillion cubic feet of gas, 4.7 billion cubic feet, billion barrels, 4.7 billion barrels of oil last year. We produced 14 billion cubic feet of LNG. We did more solar and more battery storage than ever before. So it's an all-in energy process that we have. I've just tried to make the rational evaluation that we are all understanding there's a transition coming, and we have to be part of that transition. And gas and oil and all of this, but we have to do it cleaner and better, and we can. But if the administration's fighting us on sequestration, then it's an oxymoron saying we can't do that because you're still putting out CO2 because you won't give us, we can't get Class 6 well permits. We have 128 pending. Only 2's been provided. Yet we're willing to go ahead and start collecting fines on companies that are still producing CO2 because they can't get a permit. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We're fighting our own selves of energy security, and we're not going to be able to switch for the public. There's no way that we can switch before we have something that'll do exactly what dispatchable fossil is doing, 24/7 production of energy. That's just common sense too. For the superpower of the world, for the rest of the world's security that we have and our allies are depending on it. And every time we displace Venezuela, I think we've gone back and forth on Venezuelan oil, and now with still turning a blind eye to the ghost ships coming out of Iran that uses their profits to support Hamas and his terrorist operations around the world. It just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever why we would be doing that when we produce it in the Gulf cleaner than anyone. So if we displace by producing more, it's good for the environment. But we're having a hard time. And finally, I have, last month the BLM published a final rule that authorized BLM to grant restoration and mitigation leases to third parties, restricts development in potentially environmentally sensitive areas on public lands, allows BLM to waive fair market value if the leases would further other policy priorities identified by BLM. Grazing, mining, and non-renewable and renewable energy stakeholders all oppose the proposed rule. How much public land do you expect to restrict from development under this new rule?
Senator, I couldn't tell you the specific amount of acreage, but I can tell you that fair market value will apply to the restoration and mitigation leases that we're moving forward.
Well, we would like to have an answer on two things. Okay, how much do you think that's going to restrict, and how much public land do you expect you will lease without charging fair market value, which has been historical with BLM?
We'll take those questions back, Senator, or Chairman, and consult with you.
With that, Senator Hoeven, we're so glad.